How are you adjusting to going back to the real world?
Rather well, actually. Rather well. I don't have to listen to baboons like Guy Verhofstadt, who was cozying up to Sadiq Khan yesterday. I don't have to watch this preposterous pantomime parliament anymore. And I'm absolutely delighted that we are free of the shackles of the European Union, which is what 17.4 million demanded.
Yes, indeed. And what was all that about yesterday, by the way? I mean, Sadiq Khan offering what can only be described as a pig in a poke, as we used to say in Scotland. Why don't you still remain some kind of associate member of the European Union? It's nonsense, and it means nothing.
Yeah, it's absolutely foundationless. I mean, to put it into context, we must remember that Khan was over there saying that Londoners are heartbroken at leaving the European Union, despite the fact more Londoners voted to leave the EU than ever voted for Sadiq Khan as mayor. 40% of Londoners voted to leave. The Brexit Party had 2 MEPs in the London area, and there is no legal precedent for this. There is no way on earth that the EU member states would ever allow associate membership. The UK government would almost certainly block it. Guy Verhofstadt himself admitted yesterday he would have terrible trouble talking other people at the EU into allowing this. What we have here is gesture politics at its very, very worst. Sadiq Khan is playing to his Remain base. He's acting as a kind of Mother Teresa of the Remain movement. He has no way on earth of ever delivering this. It's bogus, foundationless gesture politics. Hey, and there's a mayoral election turning up, and also Verhofstadt would like to be re-elected on this false promise. It's contemptible, Mike.
I was going to say, I mean, is this just out-and-out sort of electioneering by Sadiq Khan?
Yes. In a word, yes. There is literally no legal framework for this. There's no way it can ever happen. I've consulted lawyers overnight who know a thing or two about EU machinations, and there is absolutely no way this can ever happen. It's Sadiq Khan playing to his electoral base during a mayoral race. It's horrible.
And it's quite remarkable, because I presume it wouldn't have come cheap for him to go over there with his entourage, which he's paid for handsomely by the public purse. And I was talking to somebody about Sadiq Khan yesterday. He doesn't appear to have a boss, really. I mean, he doesn't really answer to anybody, does he?
No, and what was interesting as well yesterday was that Sean Bailey, the Conservative candidate for the Mayor of London, was out on the streets promising to reopen the 38 police stations that Khan has closed as mayor, despite a knife crime epidemic. Khan just blames the government for all of this. He always blames Theresa May for the Met police cuts. He blames central government, yet he wastes money on ridiculous things like comedians as night SARS. There seems to be loads of money for bureaucracy and staff and jollies to Brussels. And isn't it funny how Remainers are up in arms when Donald Trump talks about British democracy? Yeah, when Guy Verhofstadt came to London during the May EU elections, trying to influence people to vote Lib Dem, there was no murmur then. Yesterday, Khan is over there trying to influence the British election by using EU top brass. There's no place for this, and Khan is just a bust of flush. He'll get re-elected because the shift in demographics of London is what it is. We're stuck with Khan. He seems to just get away with all of this. He's unaccountable. He's the Teflon mayor.
I mean, is there a regret not just in your own personal sort of political ambition, but in the Brexit Party's political ambition, that there isn't a stronger candidate? You know, nothing against Sean Bailey, but he's just not going to be able to breach that kind of Labour wall, is he?
Well, that's the problem. I mean, when you look at the electoral map of the UK in every recent election, London seems to stand alone as an island of red against the Conservative blue tide, or the Brexit Party tide as it was back in May. And this is a demographic and a situational reality which more or less guarantees us a Labour mayor in perpetuity. Although, don't forget, Boris Johnson cut through that. It's going to take a huge personality to do it. I think Sean ticks all the right boxes. I think he's a great lad. I know him. But yeah, what with Rory Stewart coming in as well, splitting the Tory vote, he's up against it. But intellectually and philosophically, he's a much cleaner bet than Khan, who I think represents all that's worse about modern politics.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And what are you making today of the immigration story? We've got Priti Patel coming on a little bit later on. One of the things that you guys in the Brexit Party said you would do was to sort of make sure that the Tory party does what it said it would do.
Yeah.
Is this satisfactory for you?
Well, when you look at it on paper, it's absolute music to our ears. It's almost Nigel Farage's immigration policy made conservative. And we've seen a lot of that. We saw the same with various other policies that we put forward through the summer. If they deliver on this, then it's brilliant news. I can't tell you how many times I was contacted during my time as a media pundit, every time I spoke out about the influx of unskilled labour by guys who were truck drivers, guys who were electricians, plumbers, bricklayers, who had to give up their jobs because they just simply could not cope with the wage suppression that was forced upon their livelihoods due to unskilled labour influx from East Europe in particular. And if this is true, if those people will no longer be allowed in such great numbers, and if employers have to start paying a little bit more to British workers, then that surely is only a good thing. Business has become addicted to cheap labour. They've been weaned on it. It's in their business models. It's more profit for business owners if they pay their workers less. But it's not fair on British workers, and it's not good for the British people as a whole. So if this works, it's excellent news. I fully endorse it.
Martin, thank you very much indeed. Martin Daubney, their former MEP for the Brexit Party over in Brussels, now back in the real world, going back to what he used to do. Guys, I don't know what you made of Sadiq Khan's sort of virtue signalling trip over to Brussels, but it's not very helpful, really, is it, Benjamin? I mean, you're a guy who wanted to remain in the EU. Would you like associate membership of it?
I mean, the problem with it is that it seems like something that isn't possible, though Guy Verhofstadt does seem to have supported it, but I don't think there is a legal framework, and of course, most importantly, Boris Johnson wouldn't accept it, and he'd be the person ultimately that would have to negotiate something like this, as it would be a national decision. You would also get Scotland would start asking why they can't do something similar, because like London, most Scottish people voted Remain. But I think Sadiq Khan is standing up for the city that he represents. You know, London benefits a lot from Labour from the EU. The city of London is, produces tens of billions of pounds into this country, with lots of people from the EU and doing business in the single market. And so I think as mayor of London, not as a national politician, he represents an area that is Remain, where most people voted Remain, it benefits, and he's standing up for those people.
Yeah, except that, he also represents this country in which we live, and it's not really fitting, I don't think, for a politician to decide who he represents. I mean, he represents everyone rather than just the people of London. And rather like Nicola Sturgeon going over there the other day to talk about whether Scotland could get some kind of special status outside of the UK. That's not how democracy works, is it?
No, not at all. And as Martin Daubney was pointing out there, 40% of Londoners voted to leave. It was around 40% of people in Scotland voted to leave. So again, I think these politicians surely should be under some sort of responsibility to try and unite people across the country as much as anyone else would. I always thought it was quite funny that kind of in the wake of the Brexit referendum, you saw all these calls for kind of, London independence, or London will remain in the single market, or all these kind of half-baked schemes. Was never going to happen, of course. But nevertheless, I thought it really kind of expressed the fact that despite the fact a lot of these people like to pose as against borders, they would quite happily kind of erect one around the M25. It was a quite strange state of affairs.
But of course, only parts of London is what they would like to do. The other thing that I find quite remarkable is that, of course, amongst all of the many things that we were told would happen, there would be this great exodus of people who would feel unwelcome to be here. 2 million EU nationals who are living in this country have applied to stay, which tells you that they want to stay here because they rather like the way the UK is run. And so, and there's no danger that they will, in the future, be told they can't be here.
I mean, we've seen a sharp fall in the number of people coming from EU countries to live and to work here already. And so that would suggest that if a natural, circle of people that come here and leave over time, that we would have that number falling, and that might damage us. But the thing is, and comes back to the immigration question, is that in London, it's both ends of the spectrum that is most benefited. If you go into, let's say, a Pret-a-Manger or something like that to get a coffee, then most of those people will be EU workers. Yeah. But also, if you go to Canary Wharf, then a lot of the very highly paid, very influential people that run lots of big banks and make lots of money for our economy will be people that have come from other countries, and we've swamped up the talent to Britain and to London. And so, it is something that we should worry about, because all of us would be worse off if both of those ends fell off.
Yeah, but I don't think they are going to fall off. That's my point. I mean, there's no evidence to suggest that they will fall off. And one of the very, very key pieces of evidence is that the EU workers who are here want to stay. You know, they don't feel that as if they're not welcome. They don't fear the future. They don't worry that basically they can't continue to make a better living here than they can wherever it is that they come from. You know, only recently, just downstairs here, one barber shop has opened up, and it turns out these are all people from Bulgaria who are originally Turkish by sort of citizenship, moved to Bulgaria. They've opened about 20 different barber shops across London, you know, and they're making plenty of money, and they'd rather make it here than in Bulgaria because it's a much better economy.
I think this is one of the unfortunate things about the kind of narrative that's been spun post-Brexit, that this is because people hate EU migrants, and they just want to kick them out, that people's rights weren't going to be respected. You know, there was genuine, sincere talk from serious politicians about there being kind of like mass deportations after we voted to leave, and I think that spread a lot of needless anxiety, especially because once we've seen the results of the settled status scheme, which was not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but very few people have been refused any kind of form of leave to remain at this point, because I think by and large, despite the fact we are leaving the European Union, people do feel welcome here, people do want to come here, and as you say, I don't necessarily see that changing.
And it's still a very, very big economy, and one of the things that we now hear about the narrative between the trade talks of the EU and us is that the EU fear that Britain becomes not just, you know, a large economy off to the side, but a competitor off to the side, and that's the problem.
I mean, the EU is very good at defeating competitors, which is an anxiety. It's a pretty brutal organisation.
Well, particularly if it's inside their own organisation.
Well, I always found it odd. One of the arguments against the EU was how it can be quite nasty and quite bullish against rival smaller economies, which struck me as a good thing rather than a bad thing. But I'd hope that
it's not good for large parts of Africa.
It's not so good if you're in Lagos, or it's not so good if you're in, you know, parts of Ghana where you're trying to actually sell your fish.
You know, well, maybe I'm just too much of a tough guy, but I thought that was a benefit of being an organisation.
I never saw you as
like
a tough guy, Benjamin.
No, well, nice but tough. But you know, I do think it's difficult, and I think the migration rules are what's going to have a huge impact on this.